hear me okay? Did everybody get a handout when you came in? If you don't have one, raise your hand, and we're going to make sure somebody can get some to you, I hope. Or do we have some back there on the podium? I want to begin by looking at the inside of the handout, and if you just pay attention to the screen a little bit, we're going to give you some facts about India. I mean, I know that you probably think about India from movies like The Jungle Book or maybe even Gandhi. Some of you may have even watched A Passage to India or The Man Who Would Be King. Okay, all of these are great movies having to do with India, but there's just so much that they really don't show you. So we're going to give you some of the facts about India. The first of those is, comparing it to the United States, India is about 2,000 miles from north to south, about 1,800 miles across. And when we look at it today, it is the second largest nation in the world by population as of, I will say this, as of a year ago. I was told a couple of weeks back that that has probably changed, that India has now surpassed China. I've not been able to verify that, but it still means that there's a lot of people in a very small place. There we go. So it's the world's largest democracy, theoretically. I will say that. The Indian government that we have right now is not exactly the greatest government that India could hope for. Not great for the people, and especially not great for Christians. But when again, comparing it to the United States, we are talking about a territory that's roughly 1/3 the size of the U.S., or roughly all the territory east of the Mississippi River, with 4 times as many people. And so what we learned during COVID especially is there is no such thing as social distancing. There are so many places where literally people are living within 6 feet of each other. The slums especially, very small, just very compact living arrangements, and it's very difficult to get away from other people. And so yes, COVID was a major problem in India. People have asked me over the years, of course I've been working in India since 1993, and people have asked me, Kyle, do you speak Indian? No, for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's no such thing, but number 2, I'm just a really bad linguist. I did try learning one of the state level languages, but I really found out I'm no good. But there are 2 national languages. Those are Hindi and English. About 70% of the people speak Hindi. About 50% speak some English. And so I am able to communicate with most people in the cities, at least to some extent. But when you get out into the towns and villages, it is a very different story. Now, having understood that, there are 22 official languages that are represented or recognized by the government of India. Those are state-level languages. You look at the bottom line, the second one on that line is Telugu. This is my wife's mother tongue. And so my wife speaks Telugu, Hindi, and English. But when we talk about the languages of India, as I've said, almost every state does have its own language, so it can be very confusing. And this means it's very difficult for us when we travel. Because I have to have a translator who travels with me, this is another reason why I didn't bother learning a language, is because if I learned one state language, I wouldn't be able to use it anywhere else. But those languages, the government recognizes over 1,576 different languages that they call mother tongues. And by that they mean 10,000 people speak this language. And so, yes, it's very confusing. One of our greatest obstacles is that of finding translators. Not just a translator who can speak into the state language, but hopefully even into a particular dialect. And so, yes, that's the reason I didn't bother learning or even attempting to go forward learning a language. But now, talking about India, again, this goes back to the movies. Just think of what you might have seen or remember from the movies that you've watched that are related to India, and forget everything. India is a land of chaos, first and foremost. Now, we live in the city of Hyderabad as our headquarters when we're in the country, roughly a population of 18 million. And so that means everybody seems to be on the same road you're on, trying to get to the same place you're going, and no one gets anywhere quickly. Now, this is not Hyderabad. I've never seen anything like that in Hyderabad. But just keep this in mind. When you are trying to get anywhere in a city, It's very chaotic. That means work in the city is very slow. But my wife and I coined a phrase years ago, having to deal with traffic just like this in India. We call it graceful chaos. It's graceful because it really does feel like a dance. Everybody is just moving around everybody else, and somehow no one gets killed. It's a land of simplicity, gentlemen. How would you like to wear this? Now, what he is wearing beside the bunion, the t-shirt, is called a lungi. A lungi is 2 meters of material that you just kind of wrap around, you tuck or you tie it however you want. And sometimes you just wear it full length. Sometimes you will fold it up and tuck it in again, and it will actually form pockets. It's a very interesting piece of material, but let me tell you this, ridiculous as it might look, when it's 120 degrees outside and you have no air conditioning, it's really comfortable. Okay? But ladies, it is also a land of elegance. Now, the sari is the most commonly known dress that Indian women wear. There are many different varieties or ways of wearing it. But when you look at something like this, it doesn't matter how tall you are, how short you are, how big or little. None of that matters. It's all the same size. It's 6 meters of material that you pleat, fold, tuck, pin, and throw over your shoulder. And if everything goes well, it looks like this, and it's beautiful. If everything doesn't go well, that's a different story. Now, it's a land of festivals. It's a land of color. You would not believe some of the colors that you will find just on buildings and houses. But the festival like this, which is called Holi, H-O-L-I, Holi is like the celebration of the end of winter. This is one of 2 days in the entire calendar that I refuse to go outside my door because I don't want to get that stuff on me. The reason is that color sticks, and I mean it sticks for weeks. You will find men 2 weeks later going to work and they're still pink, or some really bad shade of green. They look like they're sick. Now, yes, this is a common occurrence. The public restroom is any wall, anywhere, gentlemen. Ladies, you do not have this luxury. Okay? I have said many times over the years that Indian men must have bladders the size of thimbles, because they will simply stop wherever they want and pass water, as they say. Okay? This is common, but this is just part of India. It is also a land of great poverty. 70% of the people of India live at or below the poverty line. India has one of the largest welfare systems in the world, and even with that, these people hardly have anything. So when we think about destitute in this country, we really have no clue. But it is also a land of extravagance. How many of you know what this is? The Taj Mahal. How many of you know what it is? Not the name of it. What is the Taj Mahal? It's a tomb. A tomb built for one person. And that was Mumtaz, the wife of the Emperor Shah Jahan, who she died giving childbirth to her 14th child, if I'm not mistaken. This was built back in the 1600s. It is almost perfectly symmetrical. She was buried right in the middle. Now, they moved her body actually beneath the main floor. You cannot get to it to see it personally, but they have a replica on the main floor so you can walk in there. When the Shah Jahan passed away, his son placed him right beside her, off-center. So he is the only reason why this building is not truly symmetrical. But now, does this have a laser pointer? Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, you can't really see it on the TV screen, but at the very bottom of the picture, I'll just come up here and point. You see all these little black things right here? Those are people. That tells you how large this thing really is. It is humongous. And it is beautiful to see. Now, enough about India really quick. I want to talk to you about our team and give you a little bit of the history. Of course, you know my parents, my father. My father made his first trip to India in 1979. We were living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time. He had been corresponding with a man from India for years, a man by the name of Bandaru John. And John had gotten a hold of my dad's address, wherever we were when this all began, just writing letters back and forth. Brother, please come to India, please come to India. And so in 1979, my father finally convinced the elders of the church there at the Southwest Church of Christ in Phoenix to let him go to India for a few weeks, and he went. And, of course, with all the stories he had heard from his father, who had been stationed there during World War II, he was absolutely fascinated. He came back and convinced my mother she needed to go with him. So she made her first trip in 1980. She loved it so much, when they came back to the States after that, the idea was they were going to move the entire family to India. So in September of 1981, I was 11 years old. I set foot in India for the first time. The plan was we were going to stay there for 5 years, and we ended up only staying 5 months. The government kicked us out because we did not get resident permits and all of that. The man who promised us these things was an absolute crook. So we came back to the States. My dad went back into local work for a few years. In 1985, we moved to Birmingham and at the West End Church, and my dad went back into India work full time. During our time in Birmingham, while I was in high school, my father would come to me at summer holidays and say, "Kyle, you want to go to India?" No. I was not interested. So I graduated high school in 1988, went straight into college, taking classes during the summers and all of that, went to work after dropping out, and after losing a job because believe it or not, I have serious back issues, and I got laid off. I was in a heavy labor job, and so I had no excuse. And my dad was like, "Kyle, why don't you just come to India?" What my dad wanted was for me to go there for 2 months and learn the work, come back here and work in his office on this side of the planet. So I went for 2 months, and my whole deal was, I say, okay, number one, I'm going to stay for 2 months, not a day longer. Number two, I'm not going to preach. Number three, don't try getting me married off to a young Indian girl. Well, you see how that worked. I met my wife my second day in the country. The day that we were planning on, that I was planning to leave, we were getting officially engaged, and 18 days later we were married. 29 plus years later, I'm still involved in India, so it's been a really long 2 months. But this is the rest of our team. Okay, no. I can't see the names up there, and it's not going backward. Can we click it back a couple screens? Chris? There you go. I don't know how it happened, but it worked. All right, so this is the rest of our team. The names are up there. I just can't see them on that screen. So Robert Hall is the one on the left. Ben Reniger right in the middle. They have been with us the longest. After my father passed away, we brought in these two other men. At the top is Joe Evans, and the top right is Steve Snyder. Now, we represent four different states in this country with the 5 of us men. Plus, of course, my mom. She is still very much involved in this work, correspondence and going to India and working over there. But let's talk about the works we do. So let's turn to the other side of the handout now. I'm not going to cover all of these, primarily because we just don't have time. But the first of these is evangelistic works. And that, we believe, is our main priority, spreading the gospel. It doesn't matter where we go, or whether it's in a city or in a village, the pace will be different. In the cities, we may have 1 meeting a night. In the villages, we may have 2 or 3, because it's just easier to get from place to place. But this is what a gospel meeting really is like. We may have a meeting somewhere out in the open air. We may be in a church building, okay? But if not in a church building, it's like this. Open plot of land, they just throw down some mats or chairs, set up a small stage for us to stand on so everyone can see, and we preach. Sometimes it will be on the roof of somebody's home or apartment complex. Sometimes it will be inside their home. But sometimes, oh yeah, we'll just close off a street. It really is like that. But now, we don't prefer this method. However, in smaller villages where there's no police force, this really is not a problem. But we have tried to explain to the men in India, we don't like to do something like this because it draws too much attention to ourselves. And it causes less problems, or this causes or can cause a lot of problems for us in India. Now, of course, this is the goal, trying to bring people to Christ. And since 1979, over 10 million souls have been brought to Christ, have been converted. Most of those come from denominational groups, not from Hinduism or Islam. We are able to convert a large number of denominational people. But now, going back to the list of the works, different types of works that we do to help teach and train preachers primarily. The first of those that started out years and years ago, back in the early 1980s, was the Cape Memorial Bible Institute. We started with one branch there in the city of Hyderabad. The idea was just to bring preachers together and teach. But what happened was those preachers began to work together and cooperate with one another. And since many of them worked with multiple congregations already, they start sharing responsibilities with congregations. And so this network of fellowship has really expanded and expanded and expanded. And it has been one of the greatest things that ever happened to us at the very beginning. Now, we did stop paying attention or tracking the work of the KCMBI years ago. There were just too many of them to keep up with. But the next on the list is the Carl Crosser Memorial Institutes of Biblical Studies. This began as a 3-month intensive preacher training course, but we ended up with several branches of that. We've changed the formats in a couple of them. We've had to shut some of them down. But you can look at the paper and you still see what we have in operation. I'm sorry, I did it again. There we go. All right, next is the Haslam Fulford Memorial Preachers Lectureships. These are a one-time-per-year event. It changes from place to place, the format, the theme of it. We try to go to a place where preachers have a lot of people they want to teach about a particular topic. And so we may have 300 men for a week. We may have 500 men for 3 days. The longest one we've ever done was in April of 1997 with 120 men for an entire month. It wasn't easy. We're never going to do it again. We take every opportunity we can to teach and train preachers. Now, this is our team at work. Here is Robert. This is in one of the sections of Hyderabad, a place called Filmnagar. Here is Brother Ben in Chennai. And here we have Joe and Steve. Both of these are at the same place, the same program. And I'm going to explain this very quickly. When my father passed away in 21, myself, Robert, and Ben all got together, and we said, because of COVID, we didn't know when we were going to be able to go back, but we made the decision that when we did, all of us would go at the same time. We wanted to have one meeting with all of our team leaders, meaning the men that we work most closely with. And so we had 116 men. 3 of our team leaders were not able to be there because of health reasons. But because Steve and Joe were new to the team, we brought them also. And one thing I want you to understand about Steve and Joe is that they are not new to India. When we brought them into our work, they had made their first trip to India before I did in 1993. So they have long histories with India. They were just new to our work and new to our workers for the most part. And so we had all of these men, and as we were in this meeting, just before I was going to get up and greet everybody, a startling revelation just kind of came to me. It said this was the first time something like this had happened in over 40 years, where we had all of the American team and all of the Indian team leaders in the same room at the same time. And so these pictures of Joe and Steve were them addressing the men. We took one day of just talking about the work, what we expected of them and our policies, and the next day we taught. And so all of us had the opportunity to be involved in that. But when we go back to the inside of the handout very quickly, just right there at the second fold, you find our ideals for the work. It's what we call the 4T formula. First, we teach. This is the gospel meetings, the evangelistic efforts, trying to bring people to Christ. But second, we teach them, but then we train them. The preachers' training endeavors, the KCMBI, the CCMIBS, the lectureships, all of these things are involved just to continually train our preachers so that they can be better equipped to do the work that they're doing. And then we trust them. Now, in this picture, I want you to pay attention to the man on the far right, the one on the cell phone, okay? Because I'm going to come back to him later. I'm going to tell you his name real quick. His name is Naughty Saint Goodham. Yes, he is our naughty saint, but it's spelled differently. It's just N-A-T-I. So we trust them, and then we turn them loose. And we do this for one very simple reason. This is truly an Indian work. And it is an Indian work for very many reasons. Number one, it's their friends and families. It's their homes, their towns and villages. It's their languages. It's their culture. And simply, there's a lot more of them than there are of us. Okay? They do the bulk of this work. We are there to help them, to encourage them, but they simply can't do this work without us because they can't afford to do it. Most of the congregations that they work with are full of poor people. Their contributions may be a kilogram of rice or a few kilograms of rice or some fruits and vegetables. So no, the preachers really can't afford to be traveling on their own to do all the campaign work. That's where we come in, is to encourage them in that. But we provide them with tools. Going back to the list of the works we're involved in, these are just a few of the things. Printed materials, bicycles, Bibles, anything that they can use to give to others or to get themselves from one place to another to be involved in this work. We help with widows. Now this, and sometimes preachers' wives. Now tailoring machines like this, sometimes if they have the ability and they can prove to us they have a legal electric connection at their home, we might give them an electric sewing machine. That's a little better than this. But some of you might remember the old sewing machines with the tread pedal wheel or whatever you call it. I still have, or my mom still has her great-grandmother's. So it's pretty nice. But now, disaster relief. This is something that hit us back in 2004. You may remember the tsunami that hit the east coast of India, devastated hundreds of thousands of families. Well, we learned firsthand that they needed help. People in this country just started sending money that we didn't ask them to send. And so through a lot of trial and error, we admit, we were forced upon this work of disaster relief. Well, disasters happen in India all the time. But that was just something that really hit home for us. Years later, COVID was another disaster. I want to say I'm proud that the picture you see here was nothing that we did. This was not the Americans. This was something an Indian congregation did. The man that was on the cell phone, Nadi St. Gudam, this was his doing. He sent me this picture. They had collected some staple foods, just a little bit, that they could distribute in the community and just help people out. And so it was a nice outreach program that they did on their own. Next, we have Kidan's Kids. This is a school for underprivileged children there in the city of Hyderabad. Because it's a private school, we fund everything. We provided the building, the salaries for the staff, books, uniforms, everything. And so they are able to teach these children free. And because it's a private school, they also have the opportunity to teach the Bible. VBS programs, whenever there is a break from school, we have men out being involved in, or congregations out doing this type of work. The Harvey K. Memorial Children's Homes. Now, the children that you see here, they're not exactly young. This was the last time I visited this place in 2019. I am sure that by now some of these kids have aged out. But going back to the tsunami, all of the children that were at this particular home in Kerala were victims of the tsunami. They lost either one or both parents. And so we started with 36 children. We are down to now less than what you see on the screen. One more work that we are involved in is preacher assistance. Now, this comes in the form of one-time gifts, just helping people out. We're not trying to solve their problems. We're not trying to make them rich. We give them a little bit so they can do a little extra for their families just from time to time. And these are for preachers only. But this, what you see, are applications for medical help. This is something that years ago, I'd been in India a few years just watching my dad deal with our team leaders and them making all these requests from him. And finally I said, Dad, why don't you just let me take medical? And he said, thank you. And so I made an application like you see here. And in doing so, I required them to supply me with photocopies of their bills, all the documentation from the hospitals. I want to have proof that what they are requesting was done and that they have paid for it. Because I'm not paying for anything in advance. They can come to me and say, brother, I need 150,000 rupees. Fine. You go find it somewhere else, pay for it, pay for the hospital bill, and then come and give me the receipts. When you do that, then I'll help you. Now, I know that seems kind of strict and mean, but the system can be gamed. And it can be gamed very easily. And so we do require the receipts. Now, I want to point out, I know you really can't see her, but the one on the bottom right, this is a girl by the name of Sonu, not to be confused with Sony, my wife. Sonu is a very special case. Normally, when a preacher brings me the application, It's a one-time deal. They have to have everything finished. I will help them one time. For Sonu, that is not the case, for a very good reason. Now, this is Bandru John's great-granddaughter. Okay? Now, her grandmother, Betty, worked with us for a number of years, working among ladies, until she passed away. One of her daughter's husband contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. Passed it on to the mother, to the wife. Sonu was born HIV positive. Both of her parents were dead before she was 1 year old. She was taken in by her aunt, Vijaya. Now, Vijaya is a woman I've known since my first days in India in 93, and it just so happens Vijaya married Nadi St. Gautam. And so they have adopted her. Precious family, precious girl. And so I do help with her medical expenses all the time because Brother Gautam, Vijaya, they didn't have to take her in. And they didn't need this extra expense. But they have decided to do so, and I'm willing to help them for it. Now, we did make a trip to India. I wish I had the pictures from it. Like I said, back in February and early March of last year, that first trip that we were able to get back to India. I talked about that right after I returned. I was here in April of last year, so we had just gotten back from India. But in September, I got to go again, and I stayed for 3 months. The Indian government has finally allowed tourism back in the regular, I don't really want to call it a schedule, but the ability for us to stay longer, up to 6 months at a time. And so my mom and I went. Sony went much earlier than I did. She was there from June of last year. But when I got there in September, hit the ground running. Now, Hyderabad is our home, our headquarters. And there is a reason I put this picture up here, because this is some of the good news we have. You see this picture on the bottom right there in the middle is our oldest daughter. That's Sunshine. Sunshine lives in India. She is almost 27 years old now. And the boy in the gray, his name is Jane. Now, it's not Jane, okay? It's Jain. Jane is not really an uncommon name in India, but anyway. She and Jane had been dating for about a year. So I met him when I went to India in February last year. Really nice young man, very soft-spoken, very polite, would do anything for my daughter, and of course that's very impressive. And so the thing is, he was raised in a Hindu family. But at a young age, in his early teens, he said he just didn't agree with Hinduism. And so he did not practice it, didn't go to the temples, didn't celebrate their festivals, nothing like that. And then he and Sunshine met, and she told him early on she would only marry a Christian. So he starts coming with her to some gospel meetings. On Sundays, when she does live streaming of worship in India, he was right there beside her. And then, because our office is also in the same facility, preachers would come in. And oftentimes, he would sit down just asking questions from some of the preachers that would visit. And so, about 2 weeks after we got there, Jane was converted. And the great thing about it is, when Sony had gotten there, she was able to go to his parents' town in Vijayawada, met the family, and the lady in the yellow is his mother. This was at his baptism. But she had already, at the very beginning, she talked to Sony and just immediately to Jane. So when are you getting baptized? So she was very supportive of this whole thing. The day that, this was November 21st, Sony and Sunshine were leaving to come to the States, and he proposed. And so in August, we are preparing for a wedding. I'm hoping to be back there in July. Sony wants to probably go a month before me, and so we'll see how that works. Now, after getting into India, these are just some of the places we were able to visit. I went to Coimbatore. I wanted to put this on here because, number one, I've never been there before. Okay, the only time I'd ever set foot in Coimbatore was landing in an airport, getting in a taxi, and going somewhere else. But I'd never worked in and around Coimbatore. And now the thing is, this was a trip that Sony and a man who we know from Hyderabad got together and arranged. Now, this is in Tamil Nadu state. The language is Tamil. So we had to use a translator I had never used before. But this man named Solomon arranged for us to go to places that congregations already in existence he knew about. They arranged preachers' meetings and gospel meetings for us for several days. Just really enjoyed being able to be there, because going to new places, seeing new people, and still having those people showing an interest in what we're saying is always a great experience and an encouragement for us. And so I did get to spend time in Coimbatore. In Telangana. Now, this is the state where Hyderabad's located. Of course, we do a lot of work in and around Hyderabad, but we spent a lot of time in other parts of the state. This is in Yangal, which is near Karimnagar. Now, Yangal, this is a work that a young man by the name of Prashant, we call him Chitti, which means little one. He's not very little, but that was his nickname growing up. So anyway, Chitti took us to this place. This is his wife's family's village. And so her father, her brother, both of them are preachers, but we were able to do the same thing. Daytime classes for preachers, some of them denominational. We are trying to just simply teach them, we're coming back to the Bible and the truth of the Scriptures. And then at night we have the gospel meetings. Sony also was involved in ladies' classes. That's what the one on the bottom is. No, I'm sorry, the one on the top is the ladies' class. All right, so now this is also in Telangana, in Sangareddy. Now, this is about 3 hours away from Hyderabad. The roads are not all that great. But again, the same thing. Just preachers' meetings during the day, gospel meetings at night. The two men that we worked with there are Brother A. Anil Kumar and B. Emmanuel. These are two of our team leaders we've known for years, and this is where they live. And I've been to the general area before, but I've never really worked with them. I've worked with some of our other men who have work in that area. Going down into Andhra Pradesh, the first place we went was Macherla. Now, Macherla was kind of just where the hotel was. We didn't really work in the city. We worked around it. And the reason for this is, I've been to Macherla many times. And there are 4 of our team leaders that we work with that are brothers. This is their native place. But the one that actually lives in Macherla, I've worked with him many times. The other 3, I've never really worked with at all. And so I said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come spend 4 days, and I'm going to have 1 day for each of you. And so I really enjoyed being able to do that because, again, I got to see some new places, new work, new congregations. And just, as always, it's great to get out and do this type of work. Now, we made a trip to Maharashtra. Maharashtra is a very dangerous place for Christians. It's a very, extremely pro-Hindu state. Okay? The Marathi people are very difficult people to deal with. But now, we arranged for Steve Snyder and myself, we traveled together, and this is where our first stop was. To get to Maharashtra, you have to go through Bidar, and that's just kind of where we met up. And we went on the rest of the trip. But we worked with 2 congregations. The thing is, Steve was at one place one day, and I was at one, and the next day we would swap. These 2 congregations that we worked with are less than 200 yards apart. Now, I know that sounds bad, but they're not divided up because of disagreements. They speak different languages. And so we had one group that speaks Marathi, one group that speaks Kannada. And so we spent those times, swapping out responsibilities with the congregations, just encouraging them, training preachers during the day, gospel meetings at night. Now, we do have the one location on that bottom picture. That was in a different location, but still only about 100 yards from the church buildings. Okay, I told them I wanted to see a different place. That's where they took me. But it was a good gospel meeting. Just really enjoyed being able to be there. Now, Sholapur is dangerous, not just because of the pro-Hindu sentiment. Okay, the government, the BJP, has a quasi-militant arm called the Shiv Sena. And these people have been known to put Christians to death. Okay, so yes, everything we did had to be very hush-hush. No advertisement, nothing of the sort. The churches are allowed to exist, and no one will bother them as long as everything stays indoors. And so that's what we had to do. We went from there to Belgaum. Now, Belgaum is currently called Belagavi. About 15 years ago, there started to be this big movement in India just to rename towns and villages away from what the British called them, back to Indian names. And so Belgaum was one of those. So Belagavi Steve and I continued this journey, and we went to there. Again, preachers' classes during the day, gospel meetings at night. Now, that is a very long trek going from there all the way back to Hyderabad. It's probably about a 15-hour drive. All right, so we get to Kurnool. This is back in Andhra Pradesh. There is a story behind this one. Now, and I think I talked about it when I was here last time. After my father passed away, I've been going through at my mom's request, going through my dad's computer, looking at his emails, getting rid of junk, and just looking for anything that might have been from someone from India. And that's what I was doing. And I came across a name that I did not recognize, but I knew it was Indian. His name was Bangi Obalesu. Now, Obalesu, in his email, does mention a man that I did know. And I have known this man since I was 11 years old. His name is RDKB Isaiah. Now, Isaiah worked with another American missionary years ago. And although he said many times he would love to work with us, both my parents and Isaiah understood that would just be bad form for us to take somebody from another American missionary to let him work with us. And so he stayed with Brother Dean Crutchfield until Brother Crutchfield passed away. And then after my father died, and Isaiah had no knowledge of this, they write this email asking us to join our work. And so I had to, of course, break the bad news about my father and then tell them that when I come to India, I'm coming to your place. I want to see your work. And so I did get to go there back at March. That was the last thing I did before returning to the States. And I told them then I would come back the next time I came. So I went and spent several more days in Kurnool and just worked with them and encouraging, teaching those preachers and encouraging the congregations and gospel meetings and all of that. All right, so Sony returned to the U.S., and then I spent 2 more weeks in India, and this is the last trip I made. I went back into Andhra. Now, these 2 towns are fairly close to each other. I had never been to either of these towns before. These are Kadapa and Prodatur. Oddly enough, we have friends from Hyderabad that both live in these 2 towns. And so we were able to go and visit them and again, do some work. And then returning to Hyderabad. Now, there is, and I'll talk about this again later, there's the insert in the handouts. I know a lot of people here in this congregation help us already, and we appreciate you as individuals. We appreciate the congregation. But anything you can do to help us, of course, is greatly appreciated. You can look at the handout. You can write a check, cash. You look on the back side. You can fill out information for a credit card. Or if you would like to do it digitally, you can do that also. I know that we're out of time, pretty much. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, and I remember you asking about these, yes. Right. And that's one thing we encourage anybody, because we get calls, emails all the time. Such and such has contacted me. Do you know him? Well, a lot of times, no, I don't. But we know somebody who probably does. India may be a big country and there's a lot of people, but these people are very closely knit. And you'd be surprised how many times we'll write to somebody and they'll say, oh yeah, I know him, he's a good guy. And sometimes not such a glowing report. So the same encouragement that my father would give when he talked to anybody here is the same that I'm going to give. If you get a request to help somebody, always verify. Because we have caught people literally walking into a church building. You see the sign on the wall outside the building that says Church of Christ, but you go inside and he'll have more signs right there, Methodist, Baptist. He's getting money from everyone he can. It is a practice and something that we are obviously very much against. And when we find somebody who does that, we're not going to work with them. But yeah, when we found out the information about Bobby and Benno, yes, we were glad to say that everything seemed legit. Yes, sir. It's available in most places pretty easily. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have to travel a little bit to get to a stream or something. And we don't really have baptismal pools with most church buildings. Okay. Some of the places where we have a hub where we can stay and we can have the classes, they will usually have the baptistry. And so people may come from kilometers around just to get to that. But the access to the water is easy. Okay, they will have either their own bore well, they can pump the water up themselves, or if needed, they'll tank it in from somewhere else. But it's not a problem. They will manage.
How big is Telangana in comparison to the United States as far as the state?
Maybe a little bigger than Alabama, territory-wise, but the population, Alabama's tiny. Okay. All right, so I'm being told that my time is up. During the break, please, if you have any questions, come ask. Come speak with me, and I want to make sure that you have your questions answered. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for letting me be with you, and I look forward to preaching during the worship time. Where does this go? You'll take care of it? I'll let you. Thank you, Terry.
He always loved messing with me.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.